On Wayward Son by TinyButFierce. Chapter 4. Natasha walked through the Avengers compound on her way to the conference room. Colonel Rhodes had called a meeting to go over new strategies. The spy heard footsteps approaching from behind her, and she turned to see Tony walking down the hallway after her. The genius took his glasses off and waved her down. Standing in the empty hallway, he glanced around and began to speak. So Friday has let me know that a certain spy has been trying to be sneaky about my kid. I wouldn't have gotten through if you didn't want me to. No, you wouldn't have. Natasha levelled her gaze at Tony. Why did I get through then? He smiled back. I'd rather keep you in a controlled environment than have you use all your resources and leak things to the press. I'm glad you trust me so much. His smile dropped. The word trust is a hard thing for me to use around any of you. I trust you enough not to hurt my kid. That should be enough for you. The spy nodded and the two continued to walk in silence towards the conference room. Right as Tony was about to open the door, Natasha interrupted. Tony, thank you. I won't break your trust again. Tony stared at the spy, whose gaze was resting on the door, her emotions uncharacteristically open. She glanced back at him and he nodded in acknowledgement. He opened the door to the sound of silence. Tony and Natasha walked into the room to the obvious aftermath of an argument. Rhodey was staring at Rogers with his arms crossed, the super soldier in the same position. Wanda was leaning back in her chair with a hand over her eyes in frustration. Sam was excitedly sitting in his chair, thinking about all of the theories he had read on Tumblr. Natasha sighed. Oh no, what happened now? Rogers spun around and fumed when he saw Tony. Why didn't you give us a notice that you have an heir? We're a team, we should know about these things in advance. The genius raised an eyebrow and looked at Rhodey. Have you had to deal with this for a while now? The colonel snorted. Thanks to your streak of showing up late to everything, yes. Rogers interrupted. We don't even know anything about this heir of yours. Where is he from? What's his name? Tony sniffed. I'll have you know he's from Queens. You don't have to worry about someone who's not from your precious New York. Rogers shot an irritated look at Tony. Excuse me, Natasha interrupted. I don't think this matters right now. Colonel Rhodes, you called us here for a strategy meeting? Rhodey's eyebrows rose in surprise. Wow, this is actually a reverse of what happened the second time the kid called in your presence. Rogers wants to know everything and Natasha doesn't. I'll be suspicious of that later. For now, I want to address the fact that we need to be better at working together. Rhodey continued to speak about how the two sides of the Civil War tended to team up so that neither side really worked with each other. Right as he was talking about the new possibilities of air support in conjunction with the Avengers working on the ground, Friday interrupted. Boss, Spider-Man is currently fighting the Green Goblin. Tony stood up and activated the screen in the conference room. Friday, pull up his vitals and view. Connect him to this room. A shaky video popped up on the screen and a ringing noise echoed throughout the room. An excited voice answered. Oh, hey, Mr. Stark. Hey, kid. What you doing right now? Nothing much. The Green Goblin picked up a car with an energy beam that he had created and threw the car at Spider-Man, who dodged and landed on the ground. That doesn't sound like nothing much. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Giggling, the Green Goblin shot the energy beam at Spider-Man, who jumped out of the way and looked back to see melting metal where he had just been standing. Whoa, Mr. Goblin, I didn't think you set your phaser to stun. You might want to get that checked out. Tony sighed. What have I told you about talking while fighting? Don't do it? Yes. You do it all the time. This is a do as I say, not as I do situation. Don't do anything you wouldn't, and don't do anything you would. Exactly. The Green Goblin continued to giggle uncontrollably while shooting beams around and causing massive destruction. Hey kid, why don't you rev him up? He made a force field around himself. All right, kid, you're going to have to go to the mattress while I make my way out there. Tony turned away from the screen and asked for Friday to tell the Accords Committee he was going in, as Spider-Man was heard protesting from the screen. No, Mr. Stark, I have this under control. Also, The Godfather, really? The Godfather is one of the best movies of all time. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. Excuse me, I can at least enjoy quality films. What do you watch? High School Musical? You gotta get your head in the game, Mr. Stark. Also, didn't you quote Mean Girls the other day? No. Ha! I'm still coming. You won't distract me. Right at that moment, the Iron Man armor assembled around him, and Tony flew out of the conference room towards the battle. The feed disconnected from the screen, and the other Avengers were left sitting around the table in shock. Rhodey stood up. We should probably follow him. They all nodded and made their way to the Quinjet, flying towards Queens. They landed on top of a building in the vicinity of the battle and made their way through an area that was moderately destroyed because of the Green Goblin's energy beam. In the distance, they could see the police arresting the Green Goblin and Spider-Man standing next to Tony, whose helmet was off and was gesturing wildly at the neighborhood hero. They could just hear Tony from where they were walking from. No, you don't get to risk your life like that. I told you I was coming. I can't have you be hurt. I couldn't let him hurt that cat. Really? You're worried about the cat and not the property damage? Yes, Rogers interrupted their argument. It's always nice to meet someone who actually cares about living things. Spider-Man turned angrily towards Rogers. What did you say about Mr. Stark? I'll have you know. Ah! Parker's scream echoed into the distance as he flew off inside the Iron Man suit that Tony had deployed around him. Tony stood with his arms crossed in his Armani suit and glared at Steve. The Avengers stood there in silence until Sam chimed in. What was that? Tony continued to glare at Steve. Sam continued to speak. Because that was kind of weird. I was looking forward to the verbal battle, but now this is just suspect. Wanda sniffed and walked away, muttering about Stark. Steve crossed his arms and stared back at Tony. Natasha glanced between the two, while Sam continued to fill the silence. Rhodey finally chimed in on the comms. All right, people, head to the Quinjet. We need to have a debrief. A new Iron Man suit landed next to Tony, and he stepped into it, flying off to the compound. The other Avengers got back onto the Quinjet. Steve thought out loud while talking to Natasha and Sam. Tony said his heir is from Queens, right? I think I know a certain someone who's also from Queens. Sam gasped. Spider-Man is his heir? One of my sources had that theory as well. Natasha stared at Sam. Your sources? Where are you getting information from? KGB? Interpol? Sam paused for a moment and then said very quietly, Tumblr. Natasha sighed. You'd be surprised at the amount of things they get right. Sam whipped his head around to face her. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. No, please tell me. Nothing. Steve ignored the banter going on between the two and instead stared at the wall in front of him, the thought of Queens running through his head.